the easiest way to feel better and to get out of spiraling stress or suffering, if it's related to yourself, is to think about other people, is to give to other people. It's the best known way that I've figured out how to get out of my head, not feel bad for myself, be self-critical, all that stuff. And so I offer that as well. It's like, if you're having trouble finding purpose or meaning or finding firm ground in any of this, see what you can do to give back. See what you can, and it can be little things, little tiny things. Just, calling up a friend who might be suffering as well, or suffering more, or doing what you can to give back to community right now. Because anyone who has time to listen to your podcast probably has the ability to help on some small or maybe a big way.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Look Up podcast. It is May 8th, 2020, and we are now 7 weeks into the coronavirus quarantine across the United States and the rest of the world. Many of us are starting to slowly come out of quarantine, many different places, including where I am here in France. And man, what a time. What an interesting situation that we all find ourselves in here, and an opportunity to really reflect and dive into what we find to be important, what's changed in our lives, what hasn't changed in our lives, connecting with those around us who we love, reevaluating our relationship to death and the economic machine that seems to drive most of our society. Really been quite eye-opening for me, particularly. And if you also follow along on my weekly newsletter, The Look Up Weekly, which you can sign up for on my website, thelookuppodcast.com. You'll be able to hear some of my additional thoughts and writings on what's changed for me and where my thinking is going in this current situation. And as always, I just want to quickly thank you all for continuing to listen. Look Up to me is so much more than just a podcast. It's a community of individuals that are searching for truth and trying to identify the shared humanity, the shared challenges that we face, the shared opportunities that we have in front of us, and the tools and practices to help us discover ourselves and really diving into what it means to be human in today's world. And this episode is no exception. I had the privilege of hosting my friend, Danny Steiner, on his birthday. This was last week. Danny is the co-founder and COO of Kenshō Health. He's a plant-based entrepreneur, a digital innovation strategist, and an investor who's deeply focused on disrupting the way we live and increasing global well-being. Kenshō, the company that he started, is the first curated holistic health marketplace that connects verified providers, students, and brands across practices including yoga, meditation, coaching, acupuncture, breathwork, Reiki. The company was described by TechCrunch as the antithesis of Goop because the company focuses most of its energy on science-backed holistic health offerings. And what I found so cool about Kenshō and why I wanted to have Danny on is that at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Kenshō sprung into action to offer free and donation-based online health and wellness classes through their Instagram platform, inviting practitioners like me to lead sessions for those of us that really wanted to lean into our mental health and physical well-being while in quarantine. And so in this episode, Danny and I spoke about what it means to be an entrepreneur who dog foods, quote unquote, their own product, meaning that he is an entrepreneur who not only believes in what he's building, but also uses these practices regularly. He's been meditating since he was 14 years old. And I'd say he's trialed most, if not all, of the holistic health offerings that are currently available on Kenshō's platform. He tells me a bit about the start of Kenshō, where the name came from, how they were able to find thousands of holistic health practitioners around the country, and why he's most excited about attracting new customers who have never experienced any of this holistic medicine before. Danny also explains how mission-driven entrepreneurs can align their incentives with both their investors and their customers, even as they focus on growth and the bottom line. We chat about building healthy habits during quarantine. We talk about Danny's personal health habits. We explore the differences and nuance between science-backed practices and experience-based learning, which in some instances can be just as valid. We laughed about Alan Watts and the idea of the cosmic joke, reminding ourselves that we are mortal and that we're all going to die. And then Danny kind of closes the episode sharing his thoughts on service. So it was a really beautiful episode. Frankly, I thought I could have done a better job listening. I share a lot of my own thoughts in this episode, but there's always an opportunity to have Danny back on next time to share even more of his personal knowledge and his Kenshō journey. So thank you to Danny for coming on the show. Thank you again to all of you for listening. And yeah, check out Kenshō. I'm actually a practitioner on the platform. I'm offering yoga classes and breathwork sessions. And Danny and I, every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific for the last 4 weeks, or maybe 5 weeks now, have been leading a breathwork session to clear negative energy, to calm and center yourself, and then to create through manifestation and imagination. So this is an episode that's really close to my heart and taps into some of the things that you all know I love. And without any further thoughts from me, I bring you Danny Steiner. Danny, thanks for coming on the Lookup podcast. Appreciate it. You coming on last minute.
That's my pleasure.
Yeah, so we were, I was originally scheduled to record with someone else. We were literally in planning process of getting you on the show either next week or the following week, and it just fell into place. And it also happens to be your birthday. So happy birthday. Thank you. Yeah, I cleared my morning to sort of allow myself to have time and space. And when you asked me, I was like, you know what? Yeah, fuck yeah. How else would I want to spend my birthday than having a fun conversation with a good buddy? So it's totally my pleasure and really happy to be here. Awesome. I love how that works out. And now you and I have spent the last 2 mornings together. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about. So you've been in full kind of service mode since the COVID situation kind of started rocking everyone's world, and we've all been on quarantine now for, man, how many weeks? It's 6 weeks over here. I think you went into quarantine pretty early as well. So physical distancing. Yeah, for me it's been about 6. I think around March 8th or 9th, I think was when I really recognized, okay, I need to start changing my behavior. I'm seeing what's happening in New York, seeing what's happening in Europe. So around the same time. Yeah, it's crazy. And, you and the team at Kenshō kind of jumped at the moment and provided a platform for holistic practitioners to offer their services and kind of showcase their services to your community and their communities on Instagram. And now more than ever, I feel like individuals that are trapped at home it's wild to see how service providers have really stepped up and are giving so much of themselves to share these practices. But people need it right now more than ever. And so I feel like this moment in time for you and for Kenshō is kismet, or Bashir, as they say. And of course you have to be sensitive to the broader struggles, societal issues that we're going through right now. But man, it's really at least in my kind of social media feed, for sure, it's really leveled up the awareness of the Kenshō platform and its practitioners?
Yeah, I mean, I think when things started getting hairy, we just immediately asked ourselves, how can we help? Krista, my co-founder, and I, we were actually about to go into seed fundraising. We had raised a large pre-seed about a year ago, and we had launched in, I think, late January, and we're about to go out for a large seed round. And so I had the seed deck together. We had, a decent amount of money already locked up and confirmed from our existing investors, and we were about to go kind of hit the road. And once things got intense and into this place of, at least early lockdown, and seeing what was happening in Europe and in Asia and in New York, it just didn't feel right to go out and raise money. Just didn't feel aligned at all. Because as you know, it just takes so much energy and effort. Mm-hmm. There's not much else you can do. And so what we decided to do is just put all of our efforts into helping community and utilizing the resources that we had available to us, and raise kind of a bridge round, just keep us around, keep the lights on. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really grateful that we've been able to do what we have, and that we have this incredible practitioner community, thousands of practitioners now who are, they're just incredible people, stepping up in ways that so many of our servicemen and women are stepping up, sacrificing, for others, and really helping and healing. And yeah, I think a positive externality or byproduct of that situation is, I think it's been really great for our brand to be able to tell our story and showcase a lot of the folks, including yourself, who are so talented, and who have so much to offer. Yeah, it's an interesting time, right? Because our whole framing of what's important has been completely shifted, and health is obviously front and center. And I think that there's a lot of questions around the way that we look at health right now, and people are looking at alternative ways to heal, to grow, to survive during this quite traumatic time. And I think that Eastern and alternative and holistic practices are beautifully set up, really, for dealing with this sort of really real human suffering.
Absolutely. And I think that, health and the way that our existing healthcare system operates is predominantly to treat the symptoms. It's more reactive than proactive. And this kind of rise in holistic health or wellness, and I'd love to get your thoughts on definitions, maybe, and because there's so much under those umbrellas. There's so many different methods and practices and whatnot, but I feel like at least this holistic medicine movement is more about being proactive and treating the root cause of symptoms, rather than the symptoms themselves.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. And we've done a lot of thinking around whether to call ourselves a wellness company or alternative medicine or holistic health, holistic medicine. I think that the root of all of it is it's prioritizing preventative and proactive care, rather than just reactive and symptoms-based or more acute focused care. And just as a caveat, Western medicine is amazing.
Yes.
Our medical system is unbelievable. If I get into a car accident, and I'm not going to my chiropractor if I'm suffering and like dying on the street. Please take me to a hospital. please have a Western trained doctor to treat me.
Yeah.
They're absolutely the best for that. But for so many of the mental, emotional, often physical trauma and symptoms that we have, our Western system is just not really sufficient. It doesn't really address the needs of so many of us. If you look at even before COVID, numbers of suicide, depression, loneliness, obesity, addiction, really not going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Even despite the fact that we're living in the richest country in the world, the richest country to have ever existed. We suffer from a lot of pain and suffering. And unfortunately, Western medicine is really not set up to deal with that kind of pain and suffering. And a lot of Eastern alternative stuff is. It was rooted in that, from meditation and yoga, which, I think we both have, you've studied a ton and I've studied quite a bit. It was rooted in that problem 2,500 to some say, 5,000-6,000 years ago.
Yes.
Or no, five to 10,000 years ago. My math isn't very good. It was rooted in this, like, trying to solve suffering, human suffering, which existed then and certainly exists now. So for me, holistic health is really looking at the whole person, knowing that it's connected in all of its nuanced and variable ways, that psychological stress is related to diet, is related to physical treatment of the body, is related to spiritual health as well. That it's all interconnected, and so to treat many of the symptoms that we have, or to optimize for other ways in which we can better ourselves, we really need to consider the whole person, the bigger picture is how we look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you said, right, that important caveat of Western medicine is great and it has its place and it's necessary. And some of the miraculous surgeries, my father is an ophthalmologist, and he gives people the gift of sight, like people that could not have seen before. With laser surgery, now they can see. And cataracts and all those things. So it's fantastic that that's available to us. But as you said, there is a tremendous amount of suffering. And I was just thinking about this recently. I believe it's something around 40 million Americans that suffer from anxiety-related disorders, including depression. I think the suicide numbers are staggering. It's the 10th leading cause of death in our country. It's on the rise among young people, and particularly young women. And there's clearly, and that's not even tapping into the opioid crisis in our country. Mm-hmm. And so there's clearly something is broken. We're number one. The United States accounts for 25% of global domestic product, and yet we're ranked 19th in global national happiness. There's potentially, it's getting to the bottom of it is hard, and there's probably a multitude of cause and effect relationships happening here, but I believe taking a proactive approach to mental, spiritual, emotional, and of course, physical health, because stress-induced physical problems like heart disease, potentially cancer, we don't know the relationship between stress and cancer perfectly, but there's some kind of cause and effect going on there. Diet, and leading to diabetes. I mean, these are all so important and definitely one piece of the puzzle. So it's fantastic that you guys are working in this area.
Well, the thing is, like, none of this is, we're just kind of, I think we're just reminding people of what already exists. and making it easier for them to access. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when Krista and I met a few years ago, we actually met through a Burning Man camp, and we were both trying to tackle this issue of each of us had so much success with Eastern alternative care, and has changed our lives in different ways. For me, it was kind of a slower burn from a young age. It gave me some meaning and purpose and understanding to the greater workings of things.
So there was
hadn't had before.
There was no, or was there? You said it was a slow burn. I remember yesterday you mentioned that you started learning meditation in high school.
Correct. Yeah. So I started learning when I was about 14.
Fantastic.
And yeah, I've been meditating since then. Not every day over the last, let's see, it's 16 years. But pretty good amount. Fairly consistent over that time.
I mean, if you'd been, you would get the gold star if you had meditated every day for the last 16 years from that age. I mean,
know. But I mean, how amazing would that would be great. Like I would be I would be so much more elevated than I am right now if I did.
Well, perhaps that's what a platform like Kenshō Health can offer is making something like meditation as consistent as something like eating. But going back to what you were saying, so you started learning meditation when you were 16, 14
with Mr. Lysat, who I told you used to say a lot, be a human being, not a human doing.
Yeah.
But anyway, just long way to say, Krista and I really wanted to make a lot of these health and wellness holistic practices more accessible to more people, that we had seen it change our lives. We had seen it change a lot of the lives of people around us in our bubble of Burning Man and entrepreneurship and generally privileged people living in LA and New York and San Francisco, et cetera. And we're like, how do we get
You anticipated my next question.
Like, how do we get more people to get access to this shit? Because it's not like it's expensive. Mm-hmm. You know, it's way less than going to Barry's boot camp once a week, whatever. In many cases, it can be free. Like meditation can be free, right? Like all you need is a little time. That's all you need. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. It's like, how do we make this more accessible? Spread the word, really. Spread the word of a lot of these practices that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. Some of them newer, but many of them old. Because man, our healthcare system is a little broken, and we believe very much, like our thesis is that holistic health is one of the main answers to a lot of these problems.
And I know you guys are early in your development of the platform. I want to go down, there's two roads that I want to go down. So I'm going to say them now so that we can go back to the path that we don't take later on. We can circle back to it. The first path is the convergence of holistic healing and medicine with the capitalist, Western driven VC growth metric mentality, right? Like with some of the funds that have invested in your company, I know that they are looking for this specific revenue target at this specific valuation, and that user count and particular KPIs, key performance indicators for those listening at every round. And of course you want this to grow, but you want this to grow right. So and that also trickles down to the practitioners. As someone that's been offering, breath work through the Kenshō IG Live, kind of navigating as an individual what offerings are free and available to the community versus what offerings do I believe there needs to be a value transfer for? How do we determine kind of the correct value? So that kind of bleeding into capitalism and easing of suffering. That's one path that we can go down. So I'm going to leave that for you there.
Good.
And
I'm excited about that.
And then the other path is your early days right now. And you mentioned kind of the position of privilege and the coastal kind of Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, maybe Austin, Texas, a little bit of Denver, some other spaces in the country, where these practices are clearly on the rise, and yet, I guess you want to expand that offering globally, or at least starting with kind of the rest of the United States. So how do you bridge to the communities that might see, that is quote unquote woo-woo, or, more for like liberals in blue states or coastal cities?
Yeah, so these are great. These are great paths. No, these are great paths to go down, and really good questions. Yeah, in regards to the VC question, I think it's a question. It's a good question for any company that's mission driven. I'd say that's trying to serve some underlying good. Like, can it coexist with venture capital? I think that a lot of the times it can ruin companies. Venture capital can, especially if you don't have the right partners involved. I'd say for us, we're really, really lucky to have two partners in Crosscut and Female Founders Fund, and actually a third in Evolve Foundation, who are all really supportive of what we're doing. Not to say that they don't want to see returns. They're not doing this for just out of pure goodness.
Yeah, they're stewards of their limited partner capital, and they need to generate returns.
They are, and they do. But they all really believe in what we're doing. They believe it more than just from a revenue or KPI perspective. So that's I think that's one part of it. And then the second part is I think that you can do well by also doing good. And I don't think that I think at times there can be perverse or indirectly or inappropriately correlated or inverse incentives between VCs and a mission-based company, and we may bump up against that. But I think at this stage, at least so far, I think they're quite aligned. I think that if we are able to drive more relationships between clients and holistic health practitioners, that will be very good for the world. It'll be very good for practitioners. It'll be really good for clients, and it'll be really good for our bottom line and for our investors. So I think at the moment, at least, incentives are quite aligned. And for us, for Krista and myself, I guess the third part is we would rather not build a company than build it improperly or incorrectly with the wrong incentives in mind. So that's just something. I think that's just something that every founder has to find their line in the sand, the type of company that they want to build. For us, our mission is so important, and if we lose sight of that, the company is not going to be the same. We are not going to do the same. We're not going to be as driven and dedicated to what we're doing if our mission shifts. If we're only focused on how many, just throwing out something here, how many ad dollars can we bring in next month, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a great question. I think it's something that every founder needs to figure out for him or herself as they're going through it, because sometimes the incentives are not aligned. And I think that if you have a strong mission, a good business model, and really good partners in your VCs, ones that are looking at the long-term effects and the long-term return, I think that these incentives can actually be really aligned and mutually beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's certain times when it's especially in like the seed, pre-seed where you are, right? Like the growing of the user base is so aligned with the VC capital. And then, as you mentioned, kind of selling ads, right? Like that's when at a certain point, it's like, how do you monetize? And even companies like Facebook, which is now massive, they face that question, I think, in around like 2012. It's crazy to think not even a decade ago, they were trying to figure out how to make money. Mm-hmm. And it was like, it was a huge question mark. And with Steward, the company that I'm working on right now, it takes time to get to know the customer and to understand, we work with farmers. And so understanding the farmers and what their needs are, and not wanting to blitz scale, quote unquote, just because you want to be able to serve them as best you can. And it seems like we're actually moving towards in a similar direction to Kenshō, in that it's the platform model where you're connecting, right, the supply side with the demand side seems to be a great way to scale up and kind of create that flywheel of incentive alignment for everyone. And so when you went about building Kenshō, because you said you already have thousands of practitioners on the platform, it sounds like first you started with let's bootstrap the supply side of this. So how'd you go about building this Rolodex of incredible holistic health practitioners that you have?
Yeah, we with any marketplace, it's always a chicken or egg problem. You hear that a lot. And we heard that a lot in our initial meetings. Like, okay, great. Like, yes, we see there's a supply. Yes, we see there's demand. Which one are you going to focus on first? And we just thought the supply made the most sense from the beginning. And so at the start, it was just hustling. It was just reaching out individually, actually, having 20, 30-minute conversations with every provider, every practitioner, explaining what Kenshō is about, explaining why they should join, what would be in it for them. And part of it was like, we're kind of figuring it out as we go, as I was telling the story, right?
With startups.
And then we were lucky enough to be introduced and eventually partner with this large network of holistic health practitioners in New World Native. And Ray Hughes is now leading our community, and she brought over a lot of her people with her, and that allowed us to scale fairly quickly on that end, and then kind of begin focusing on the demand side of things too, and scaling up that, which, as you mentioned, with the flywheel effect, obviously are interrelated.
I have so many questions because I like, there's the business side of my mind that wants to start to like go into some of the questions around, the customer retention and things like that. But there's also just this other part of me that wants to just talk about the various offerings on the platform and kind of what you're seeing, what emerging trends you're seeing. It's always tough to figure out where to go next. Well, first of all, let's circle back to that earlier question. So how are you thinking about communities because you kind of responded very well to the VC point, which is you figured out a way to align the incentives of all the stakeholders in your company, the practitioners, the consumers, the investors, yourselves, which is fantastic. And then, the other question there was, how do we, my assumption is that most of the practitioners, certainly, but the users on your platform are those that have already been grown aware of these holistic health practices and were already interested in yoga and, Reiki and meditation and nutrition coaching and all of the other services that are offered on the platform. What about getting that customer that's not the core evangelist for the product, but possibly needs it the most?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest opportunity. both from a business perspective and from a perspective of the most change that we can drive in our society. The mom who lives in Brentwood, California, who's doing yoga 3 times a week and spends $50 a week on juices, and who loves Goop. Definitely would love her to use our platform and think that there's a lot of benefit to her. But I think that the farmer in Nebraska who, is suffering from real stress around making ends meet or whatever have you, I think that the potential growth for that person is far greater. And I think that, interestingly enough, we've already seen a ton of demand from places outside of those major metropolitan areas of LA and New York, which is where we focused almost all of our efforts. I used to live in New York, have a big community there. We saw those as the 2 biggest markets. As you mentioned, kind of the lowest hanging fruit for us. But regardless of that, we've seen a lot of interest and demand from other parts of the country. We see practitioners popping up and applying from rural parts of Texas and Alabama, like really from pretty much all the 50 states, which is crazy.
That's awesome.
Even though we haven't advertised to them. We've done very little advertising anyway. So that's one part of it. It's like there actually is already demand. And then the second part of it is, what can we do to proactively reach out to them? Luckily, many of our practices are already very remote or very virtual by nature. So meditation and breath work and even yoga and some of the functional medicine stuff. Obviously, acupuncture is a little bit harder to do virtually.
Although a friend of mine was saying that he's working with an acupuncturist using peppermint oil and putting peppermint oil on the various parts of his body where the needles would typically go to activate those areas. So that's right. There's all sorts of solutions that people are finding to these.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that one. I love that.
Yeah, it's super
so
cool.
I think that like the demand already exists, and then also create a product and a brand that is relatable. And so we've really, really made efforts to make our brand feel more inviting, feel authentic and objective, both interesting for men and for women, which I think is unusual in the space. Hopefully relatable to people of different ethnic backgrounds and national backgrounds.
I've got to sync you up with Mariam Ajayi if you're not already connected to her. She was my last guest on the show, and she's her initiative is diversity and wellness. So I'm sure she.
I'd love to speak.
Yeah,
love to speak. Please. Just asking those questions, like how can we be more relatable to diverse audiences, I think is really important. It's very much at the foundation of what we're doing. And yeah, honestly, reading the data, like understanding where the next opportunities are. And many of them are going to be in those larger metropolitan areas, but many of them are not. And yeah, I see huge opportunity in expanding this across the nation.
And do you think that you're going to stay virtual? Because I feel like you guys are making so much progress with the virtual offerings. Is that something that you intend to stick with?
Yeah, I think for the most part, luckily we're set up to flex quite nicely, and we can facilitate connection virtually or in person as things progress. And my guess is that in a month, acupuncturists are going to be able to work with their clients again, for instance, and body workers as well, and we'll be able to do smaller group in-person things. We may not have the mass meditations of Big Quiet in Madison Square Garden anytime soon, but I do think that we'll have kind of smaller group in-person stuff. So yeah, we're definitely going to push on virtual. I think that this is an interesting time for health of all types, that we're shifting to at least asking the question, does this need to be in person? Could this be easier to facilitate over Skype, like we're doing here? And it may be like, if rather than going into a doctor and getting a prescription filled, could we just have a 5-minute call over Zoom or Skype or a phone call? Maybe.
Yeah. So you're still playing around with that and figuring it out as you go, and it's all an experiment.
It's all an experiment. It has to be iterative. We're just trying to bob and weave as best we can, ultimately.
So to your point on branding earlier, and kind of touching on, being more for both women and men, I have to ask, because in the write-up about your pre-seed raise, the journalist took a quote and put antithesis of goop. And I know how those things work, because they take the juiciest quote they can find, and that's the title. But I mean, in your mind, kind of, what does that statement mean?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually spoke to someone in partnerships at Goop last week. Just kind of just like reaching out, getting a sense for what some of those collaborations might look like. Because I think Goop is an amazing brand, right? And it speaks to a lot of people, mostly women, mostly wealthy women, frankly, living in metropolitan cities. But that group is incredibly influential, and it's still it's a very important group. And obviously, they've done a ton to spearhead and drive the conversation around wellness forward. With Goop Lab, and some of it is not necessarily positive, of course, but at least it's certainly in conversation. And they're doing a lot of good work. So yeah, antithesis of Goop. It was a comment that my co-founder made, sort of offhandedly, actually, and I think immediately afterward was like, "Please don't print that."
And they were like,
of course, that
you didn't say it's off the record.
Right, exactly.
I've had some experiences with that sort of thing.
But to us, that just means that we're not sensationalist. We're not going to try to sell you shit that is unproven, just to make more money. And we're going to be as research and science-based as we can be. So we have a partnership with a company called Thoria, which is sort of the innovation arm of Wiley, which is the largest research publisher in the world, mostly scientific journals and stuff like that. And so we have access to pretty much like the world's library of research. And so we've pulled a lot of that research to inform a lot of the decisions and recommendations that we make on the platform.
Yeah.
And so for us, we think, Goop has a PhD section, which is great. I'm glad they're going in that direction. But I would say historically, they haven't been on the right side of some of these arguments, whether it be, $1,000 jade yoni eggs or what have you. So we really want to be objective and research and science-based. And that's kind of what we think about when we're thinking about, and also for everyone, right? Like we want to be sort of the everyman brand. And so those are the two areas where we think we're different from Group. Maybe not antithetical.
to that point, like what is Kenshō, where does it come from, and how'd you pick that name?
Yeah. So I was actually looking for a word or a phrase or an idea to describe sensations that I've been having. This is probably 5 years ago. And it would happen sometimes when I was on a run. It would happen when I was meditating. It would happen, just kind of throughout the day, of like moments of, people call it download or understanding or insight, or like an aha moment of awakening. I was like, man, like I wonder if there's a word to describe that. And so I went searching for it, and I found that in Zen Buddhism, which is more or less the meaning of Kenshō. It's usually coupled with Satori, And the way that I have interpreted it is,
and what is Satori?
Satori is nirvana. It's
Okay.
it's like full on enlightenment, and Kenshō is a form of that. But we've interpreted it really as meaning more of a moment of it that needs to be cultivated, for more moments of it that can lead to Satori.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to in the yoga tradition. There's before samadhi, there's dhyana, and samadhi is kind of the nirvana state, and dhyana is like deep meditative state. And so it's like you kind of drink from the well, but you don't fully dive into the ocean just yet. So that's super cool. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into Zen. I've been listening to a ton of Alan Watts recently.
Mm.
He's just
what have you been listening to?
So there's Audible has a series of lectures, which it's the essential Alan Watts, but I think it has a different name. I think it's not out of your mind. What's it called?
Yeah, Out of Your Mind.
Yeah, it's Out of Your Mind.
Yeah, I've listened to it.
Oh, it's so good. And you know what I love about him, man?
A couple times actually.
You know what I love about, like, I just love that sense of humor, that like the cosmic joke, you know, like I get so swept into like this fucking seriousness all the time. Like even on this show, I catch myself, I'm just like, oh, I'm being so rigid, you know, like let's open it up. Let's loosen it up a little bit. And he's just so fantastic at integrating these really complex ideas that are like, he says, you know, I'm sincere, but I'm not serious. And serious is like, it's a matter of life and death. And like everything is very, you know, like military style. It's very serious because you're dealing with lives. But sincere is, there's caring, but it's, you know, it's the dance, it's the game. So
it's the dance, it's the play. And
yeah.
I think that's something that he translates and articulates so well, which I think is beautiful. Is this play, this dance that's constantly going on, and this kind of cosmic laugh, and like his laugh is infectious.
Yes, it is, for sure.
Right, and he's oftentimes laughing about and making and, you know, kind of poking fun at the most essential questions of humanity and existence.
And I feel like that's, in some instances, that's the only response we can have, because the deeper I go into this stuff, the more confusing it gets, and the more I'm just like, fuck, like I really don't know, you know. And there's such a power to those words, I don't know. That's just like releases us from this ego trip of seriousness. It's cool.
Absolutely. No, I think knowing how much you don't know is, I think is a wise and egoless path to go down. You know, I wish that there were more people that had less ego around what they know.
Yeah. I mean, and every day it's like a task to try to knock down the ego too, because it just creeps in these, you know, in these strange ways. Like even like I think it was Emerson. He said like self-deprecation is self-exaltation. And it's basically like, you know, I fall into this trap all the time of just, I'm comparing myself to an imaginary version of myself that I'm simultaneously idolizing. I'm like doing all the things. I'm working hard. I'm meeting great people. I'm having incredible experiences. You know, I'm releasing content. I'm on my path, and it's never enough. And it's never enough because I'm constantly comparing myself to this like golden calf version of Mark that's like perfect, and his podcast has 1 million downloads, and he's a best-selling author, and he's speaking all over the world. And it's like, man, just give yourself a fucking break.
Yeah, totally. No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I certainly have that too, and I think that when I'm at my best, I'm just recognizing that and I think that birthdays are a good time to do this. is like moments of reflection. Like, am I on the right path? Like, are the steps I'm taking generally in the right direction? Do I feel quite good about this next step I'm taking? And I think if you can answer, for the most part, yes, for those sort of questions, like you feel good about the direction you're headed, at least, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, and of course, we know this, and it's almost trite in how often it's said, but you know, the destination, like there is no destination.
Yeah.
Like the journey, the experience is the transformation. There is heaven on earth if you choose or allow it to be here. I forget all the time.
Me too. And you know, I'm on this spiritual journey, and I recognize it, and I'm observant of it, and it can become, and that's why the cosmic dance, the play is so important, because it can become so rigid and serious of like, oh man, you know, like I fell out of that moment of bliss, and I fell out of that state of peacefulness, and the constant reminding myself that abundance is all around me and it's my birthright, and I have it. And then there can be this harsh kind of critic that comes back and is like, yeah, like you're just not there, man. You know, you're not there yet. Like,
do you have any tools to remind yourself to take, you know, to be sincere without serious, or to laugh or whatever it may be?
Well, so the breath is super important for me, as you know, because we've been doing some breath work together, and sometimes just like getting weird, like doing a lion's breath, just like like physically like making a weird face and just like getting it out.
By the way, I have some friends that joined not this live, but the live last week, and they joined right when I was going like lion's breath, like eyes out of my head, like tongue out, and they were like, whoa. What the heck is going on? Which is so perfect.
And I think, you know, what I'm missing in life right now, because I haven't enjoyed like kind of the virtual dances, and, you know, maybe for your birthday we can do some celebrating, but like, you know, dance and getting weird at a festival, you know, that kind of just the serendipity that can happen in those types of spaces, and the music and the fun, like, and just the flow of our bodies just getting super weird. That to me is truly medicine. You know, I don't know if you have ecstatic dance practitioners on, you know, on the platform.
Yeah, we do. And I love Five Rhythms and ecstatic dance and Kate Shella, and yeah myself.
Well, I wanted to, on that note, like you know, we are speaking of Watts and kind of the role that he might play in something like Kenshō, and then tying in kind of the data, because we need data and we need science, because we need to be able to bridge the gap for those individuals that require that type of kind of scientific method behind these practices. Validation, yeah, rather than experience. And I'm reminded of a quote right now that I'll share. Babaji said, and this is Yogananda. I'm holding up a card. This is Yogananda's guru's guru, and he's like this, supposedly just like evaporated in a cave in the Himalayas like a couple hundred years ago. But he came back to speak to Yogananda before Yogananda went off to another planet. Straight up, speaking of science and bridging the gap between these things, because, you know, autobiography of a yogi is not in the nonfiction section. In your books.
No, that is all over the place. Yeah, it's wild.
It gets out there, right? And this stuff can really get out there. But Babaji said, truth is for the earnest seekers, not for those of idle curiosity. It's easy to believe when one sees. No soul searchings are then necessary. Supersensual truth is deservedly discovered by those who overcome their natural materialistic skepticism. So, yeah, I'll let that sit for a second. But yeah, I want to get your take because it's like, you want to be as based in science as possible. But then there are certain things like even as I'm going through and giving the breath as an offering, I'm like, okay, well, this is what the yogi said about the nadis. And the nadis are supposedly these 72,000 psychic channels. But as someone that really lives in the rational often and likes science-based and validation as well, I have a hard time making those claims outright and saying like, you're cleansing your nadis. And so I like to offer like the option, but then I guess for you as the platform, right, for practitioners to come on, and there's a rigorous process. Like it took me, I think, a few hours and then multiple days of validation, checks to be accepted onto the platform. We know each other, which I think is fantastic. But how do you police the platform?
Mm-hmm.
And I use that phrase intentionally as well, because then it's like, how much responsibility does the platform have to actually be the police? Now we're seeing platforms like Medium and Twitter taking down certain posts, and that's a slippery slope. So
Totally.
not a question, but would love for your thoughts
No,
on
it's definitely something that we discuss, and it's evolving all the time. Honestly,
Yeah.
we want to be as open and transparent and reliable as possible, and so we're bringing in all the research that says things are really effective, all the research that says things that are not. For stuff for yoga and meditation, there's actually quite a bit of research out there proving it's really helpful for reducing stress, for PTSD, et cetera. For stuff like breath work, there's actually a lot less research out there, even though we know it to be really effective. And I'm confident that research will show that to be the case. So it's kind of a balance of our experience as practitioners ourselves, and as connoisseurs of holistic health practices, and also kind of coupling that with our more science backgrounds, and trying to make this objective as possible. So ultimately, I think it's like, just try to be a trustworthy, reliable friend that doesn't have a lot of ego, that knows a lot, and we just want to share what we know. Luckily, like, there are some tools that will help police this, right? Like, we're going to have reviews on the platform. We've already begun to, but it's taking time to build up. And yeah, ultimately we'll do our best, but it's tricky. It's not black and white at all.
Yeah, the platform game is tricky in that way. I mean, as I said, like the largest platforms out there struggle with this, with that challenge. But it's also just, like for me, I can fucking go do an alien channeling session with some gentleman on Zoom and be like, that was a profound experience, and
Right.
and hold space for that without then, necessarily, trying to get abducted or whatever. But
We all need different things, right? Like, some of us need to know that something is proven with a meta-analysis, double-blind, longitudinal study.
yeah,
Like, someone just needs to know, like, this is as foolproof as possible. And other people are a bit more trusting and willing to experiment and play. Both are great. And I think that if both of them do have that earnest curiosity, or earnest seekers, as it was mentioned in that quote, they both will find their own path. Like, we all have our own path. Like, for many people, it might be like they're actually more attracted to the stuff that's super out there. Maybe some of like the energy work that's less scientifically proven. They may find themselves like then going into yoga from there. Or maybe it's someone who starts off and like they see that acupuncture is supported by Medicaid and Medicare now, like, okay, that seems more trustworthy. We'll go in there, but they actually may end up in energy work after a while, after determining like, oh, like there's some interesting stuff with acupuncture. There's all this stuff around energy channeling through my body. That's really interesting. I want to learn more about that. So I think ultimately it's just about meeting people where they're at and providing many different paths, because there's no one path.
And are you, as kind of the platform, are you intending to, and I apologize because I've been mostly focused on my creator page, my self-centered way. Are you providing, guides and written content and videos, kind of explainers and all that? Or is it currently the matching engine? I know you have a schedule of the live programming that you're offering on your Instagram right now. But is there also the research that you mentioned, studies and all of that posted on Kenshō?
Yeah. And frankly, I think it's just a function of some of it not being as easy to find. Which is more of like a UX problem, which we're solving right now. But yeah, we have hundreds of pieces of content, lots of research that we've actually distilled, translated into more common speak, and then link out to the original research around all these different practices and common symptoms and topics. And then we have a lot of original content from practitioners too. So I don't know if you've written anything, but if you have, or if you want to, we love to publish stuff from our practitioners. Videos as well, and that will continue to grow. And we see that both as an opportunity to reach people where they're at. Someone might not be open to working with a practitioner yet, or even trying a class, but they might be interested enough to read an article, to give a voice to our practitioners, because many of them are true experts in their craft. And to relate to people, and then the third, which is just we found this out later, is kind of a positive externality of that, is it helps a lot with SEO, and when we're talking about that flywheel, that content can drive a lot of demand, which can drive supply, and supply can then drive that content more. So we see that flywheel effect as well.
That's very cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm currently working and trying to figure out for my own personal practice, like all of these methods. And I create a lot of content, like between the podcast and Instagram, and then writing a weekly newsletter and sharing my thoughts, putting together a lot of content. And, it's my sessions are kind of a new offering. Like I kind of paused from yoga teaching, and I think this forced pause has led me to be like, why not? Why not do well by doing good, as you said, with something that I'm extremely passionate about, that has had a very positive impact on my life, and to just immerse myself fully into that. I think it's really cool. I have other elements of my person, right? Like I do startup advisory work, and I invest in companies, and it's like
You're a Renaissance man.
Yeah. Yeah. Some say Renaissance man, some say jack of all trades. It's it depends on how you want to frame it. But
so that quote is a funny one.
Yes, jack of all trades, master of none, but oft times better than a master of one.
Exactly. Which the second part, for some reason, just
they cut it.
Totally ignored, but it completely shifts the meaning.
Cut it.
Yeah. The capitalist system that we're a part of cut it, right? We need to be
they want you to
specialize in one area, like work at only doing this thing, putting in this widget in the product and on the factory line. That's all you do. Don't look at the whole picture. Don't study outside of your realm.
Meanwhile, we have access to infinite information at our fingertips now, and any child that has access to a laptop or an iPad or a cell phone, has access to the world's library of information, and we're still putting them in desks, asking them to walk hand in hand, 2 by 2 in lines in elementary school, and teaching them in the Prussian style, which was meant to build the military industrial complex of that society. And it's like, okay, it's time for us to get creative. And I actually think that the future of work is generalist. I think the future of work is going to be having many different portals, as my coach calls them, towards income streams. And we all have the ability to branch out. And that actually drives me towards a question for you. How are you finding balance as an entrepreneur founder with venture backing? As we described, there's targets. Building a company is stressful. You're building a company in this holistic space. I know you. I know that you're living what you're building. But I'd love for you to share kind of with the audience what your practices are and how you're finding peace in the chaos of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes some days better than others. Generally pretty good. I think I have a solid foundation. Well, I mean, really just trying to keep it quite simple. I know the things that work for me, and that usually involves getting a good night's sleep, reading a lot, having dedicated, focused work, connecting with people I care about, meditating daily, working out almost daily, pretty much daily now, and eating well. If I'm doing those things, which at this point, I mean, and I think for people who maybe are starting from scratch or don't have the best habits right now, that can sound like so much.
I was just going to say, I feel like to some that list is like, that
probably sounds like so much. But I think that if you think about it as they're all interrelated, and once you prioritize one of them, the rest of them get into focus. So if you just take one, just say like, if you're not doing any of those things, just focus on sleep. Just say like, I am going to commit to getting 8 hours of sleep for the next month. What will happen is you're going to wake up refreshed. You're going to have much more willpower. You might say, okay, you know what? I've been wanting to do that meditation thing. I think I'm going to try that today. And you may not do it every day, but you'll do it some days. And with that, you'll begin meditating. Like, you know what I want? I want some breakfast that's going to serve me. That's going to make me feel really good. You're going to have that, you may have that breakfast some days. And then after that, you're going to be focused. You're going to be like really wanting to focus and bite into something that's useful. And because you're prioritizing your time like that, you're going to want to fill it with friends and people who you love and who give you purpose and meaning. And because you're doing all these things, you're going to feel probably better about yourself. You're going to be eating well and sleeping well. You're going to have more energy. You're going to want to work out. You're going to want to move that body. And it's honestly just a flywheel. It's the same thing we were talking about with the company. One leads into the other. Ultimately, it's just about like doing your best to love this vessel and imperfect being that you are. And gosh, there are days when I certainly don't, and there are like mornings where I do, and then afternoons where I'm like, ugh. but ultimately, just like trying to do things that I know will make me feel really good, not just in the moment, but throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout my life. So doing that stuff I found really helpful. I'm so blessed to be in Venice, California, and you probably hear a lot of birds chirping. It's beautiful outside. I have a nice little bungalow here with a cute little backyard. I'm truly, truly fortunate. But yeah, honestly, doing those things have been unbelievably helpful, and have allowed me to ride this kind of turbulent wave.
And the roller coaster of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, dude.
The ups
but
and
for
downs.
me, I think the hardest part is probably not doing. just sitting in it and allowing myself to feel and just be. That I think I could do much better at doing. For me, this sort of experience, I addressed it and like, ooh, this is an opportunity. What can I do to help? How, I'm going to become the block captain for my block in my neighborhood, and I'm going to try to donate money to all these causes, and I'm going to focus on work and work hard and like do. And for me, I think what I could do a better job with doing is just having moments or hours of just not doing anything and just feeling into this kind of crazy turbulent time.
Yeah, well put. I think we're kindred spirits in that way of, wanting to take action and being action oriented and doing. And even with some of the practices that you mentioned, it's like doing the healthy eating, it's doing the meditation, it's doing the exercise and doing the community service. And, and as you said, and as your meditation teacher taught you from a young age, we're human beings, not human doings. And then I also want to find because these things is, we're talking about Watts, there's always this conundrum. And I think the other side of that is like, what if that is just who you are and who I am and how we must operate right now? Like we must act. That is just in our nature. And the part of it that is really holding me back is the part of me that is like, I'm trying to do too much. When really it's like, wow, lean into that energy that I have, this like desire to do so much. Maybe that's okay too.
I think so. I think just listen and respond, and maybe take action. I think generally we live in I think it's good to be patient and make decisions thoughtfully. I do. And I do a lot of the time, but there's also in many places, it's just good to make a decision and see what happens. Go with kind of what feels right at that moment. And it may be the wrong step, and you can adjust, you can iterate, but take the step. And if that feels like, if you're feeling like, you know what, I'm going to be a lazy bum this Saturday, I'm going to play video games and not do anything, like, okay, like lean into that. But I do think that during this time, and I know a lot of people are suffering so much, and I do come from a place of privilege at this moment, healthy and happy and comfortable. But I think the easiest way to feel better and to get out of spiraling stress or suffering, if it's related to yourself, is to think about other people, is to give to other people. It's the best known way that I've figured out how to get out of my head, not feel bad for myself, be self-critical, all that stuff. And so I offer that as well. It's like, if you're having trouble finding purpose or meaning or finding firm ground in any of this, see what you can do to give back. See what you can, and it can be little things, little tiny things. Just calling up a friend who might be suffering as well, or suffering more, or doing what you can to give back to community right now. Because anyone who has time to listen to your podcast probably has the ability to help on some small or maybe a big way.
Yeah, respect. And thank you for sharing that with the listeners. I think that's huge. A past guest, Bill Brown, who is the executive director at the Prison Yoga Project, and a decade-long plus yoga practitioner and teacher, described the path. I guess it was the transition from one path in Buddhism, which is the path towards self-discovery, towards the path of service, Mahayana path or something. I forget the exact name, but that message keeps coming across. And one thing that I've loved about you since we've known each other is your dedication to community. You really put yourself out in building community and inviting people in. I think that's really powerful and something that I'd like to learn from. And I offered
some of it's really, really selfish. Like I know how much joy it gives me to give back. It's like I think I've like cracked that code a little bit.
Yeah.
and then on the other hand, like I love surrounding myself with amazing people. Like, like yourself. And of course I'm teasing a little bit and being slightly self-deprecating, which I guess is self-exalting. But it's true.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. And I offer like even just a context switch, right? Like for myself, what came up when you were talking about service was the context switch of this podcast can be massively of service. This conversation that we're having can be massively of service to even just that one person that needs to hear what's coming through you right now in this moment in time. And I often, as kind of like that masculine energy of that go, 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 do, get swept up into kind of the self-centered elements of this podcast, admittedly to my listeners of like, I want to grow the audience. I want to make this a livelihood. I want to do more, get more guests, grow, right? That VC style mentality to bring it back full circle. And really at the end of the day, it could just be service can be as simple as a context switch of this podcast. And I constantly remind myself, this podcast is about service. It's about bringing forward ideas and conversations that are going to support the greater good through those that are listening and sharing. That's what it's about. And it has to stay about that. The other stuff might come, it might not come. But that message of service that I keep hearing from the wonderful people that I bring on to this show, like you, is I think it's there for me as much as it's there for the listeners. So respect, and I'm so happy that we got to record this. Happy birthday!
Thanks, brother.
I'm going to let you
such a treat.
I'm going to invite you to share kind of like one or two things, whatever that you want to leave the listeners with. But first, I have this burning question. What are you most excited for post-quarantine?
A camping trip with friends.
Yes.
And I actually have two trips already in the works. Planned.
Nice.
Yeah, like being with good buddies out in nature. That I'm really excited about. And that feels also, I'm super excited about it, and it also feels very attainable. Like I think that's going to happen. Yes, I would love to, get sweaty and boogie and dance in a pack and like in the desert or in a packed warehouse somewhere. I think that's a little less likely right now. But heck yeah, I'd love to do that too. but being in nature with friends sounds perfect.
Where are you heading? Joshua Tree or?
Most likely we're talking Sierra or near the sequoias or
yes,
stuff like that would be really fun. Most likely in California. Not entirely sure what that looks like yet. Yeah.
Awesome. Enjoy that. And then
thanks.
Before you go, if there's anything that you want to leave the listeners with, any last thoughts, how they can find you or something different, whatever.
Sure. First off, thank you so much for having me on. It was such a
pleasure.
Really fun way to spend my birthday morning.
And thank you for giving me, an hour plus of your time on your birthday.
It's great. And I love having conversations like this.
Fuck yeah.
Super fun. KenshōHealth.com is our website. KENSHO health.com. Kenshō Health Instagram. We're on Twitter as well, but not as active. And my personal account for Instagram is DASTEINE, DeStein, with an E at the end. There was a Denise Steiner at Princeton, and so I got the Stein with an E at the end at Princeton.edu. which I don't know why I was pretty early on to Gmail and Instagram. Like I definitely could have changed that, but I just kept that username.
That's great.
And yeah, so I have it for everything.
And we'll link in the show notes to all the accounts, your personal and Kenshō for sure.
Great. Yeah. And, something I was thinking about earlier, which I'll leave people with, is one of the tools that I use throughout my days, which helps a lot, and I think always brings a smile, kind of a cosmic smile on my face, is reminding myself that I'm going to die. And I know that sounds to some like being a bit morbid, but in the sort of Michael Singer Untethered Soul sort of way, linking back to I think the conversation we had a little bit yesterday, can be a wonderful tool for learning how to live. Maybe perhaps the best tool, right? And it's bound to happen. So I have this app called We Croak that reminds me it reminds me to die 5 times a day. It's just a little blurb that says, just remember you're going to die. And then you can click in, and it often has kind of a poignant or not even quote sort of around death. And it does I mean, there's so many practices around death meditation, etc. But that I find to be really helpful and maybe helpful right now for people. Just remembering, like, as bad as things are, we're still alive. We're still kicking. We even in the darkest moments of pain, we're still feeling, and still conscious of what's going on, which is a gift.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It's a great place to leave this, and have a wonderful birthday.
Thank you.
Best of luck to you and the Kenshō team. I know you guys are building something special, and it's been exciting to watch the journey. And I'll see you next Monday for our breathwork session.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your evening there. I'll talk to you really soon.
Thank you, sir. All right. Hello, Look Up listeners. One final note before we go. Thank you again for tuning in. Going forward, we'll be releasing new episodes of Look Up every Wednesday morning, Eastern Time. If you're getting value from this podcast and you want to give back to support our future, please take a moment to contribute to our community on Patreon. Our Patreon contributors have access to some great additional perks, including one-on-one meditations with yours truly. I've shared the link in the show notes below the episode. You can also find the show notes to this and previous episodes on our website, www.thelookuppodcast.com. If you can't contribute at this time, there are other helpful ways to give back. You can share this episode on social media, tag me, and/or leave a review on your favorite podcast app. Trust me, every review goes a long way. If you want more content, including more of my personal thoughts, you can follow me on social media. My handle on both Instagram and Twitter is @WarkMeinstein, WarkMeinstein, or you can subscribe to the Look Up weekly newsletter on my website. I'm also very responsive to email, so feel free to send questions, booking inquiries, speaking requests, and sponsorship opportunities to marc@thelookuppodcast.com. Finally, for those of you that don't know, I lead virtual yoga, breathwork, and meditation classes, as well as one-on-one coaching and teaching sessions, which you can book from the website or my social media accounts. Thank you to Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the great intro and outro tunes and for the sound engineering. Thank you, brother. And thank you to all of you listeners for continuing to support the show, for tuning in, and I hope that you've been enjoying this journey as much as I have.